Welcome once again to Crazy Canuck Trucking. Thank you everyone that's been following along. I appreciate all the comments and the likes and shares that I get, and hope that we can continue doing that. And no extra business today, except that we have a wonderful guest that I've wanted to have on for a while, and things have been pretty chaotic in the last couple of years. So I am going to welcome Lauren McNabb to the podcast. She is a wife, a mother, co-host on CJOB The Start. It's the morning show at CJOB here in Winnipeg, along with Greg Mackling and Brett McGarry. So welcome, Lauren. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for finally getting me on. And I don't mean finally to you. I just mean finally it all aligns that we can chat.
Yeah, it's been very good. We've met in person. We've talked on the air at CJOB. Actually, we talked a couple of days ago as well. Mm-hmm. And you went for a ride with me in my truck, which was really cool. And so we'll get to that a bit later. Let's start with this. You grew up where?
Well, if you're a listener, you know it's Minnedosa because I talk about it probably too much. But I grew up in Minnedosa, Manitoba. That's a small town about half hour north of Brandon. I grew up on a farm just outside of town with my parents and 3 siblings, and lots of dogs over the years.
Lots of dogs over the years, yeah. You're so a farm. What kind of a farm were you on?
Well,
what did your parents have?
Yeah, it was, so when I was little, it was mixed. We had cattle, chicken, and grain. And then I can't recall the year, but I think I was probably 8 or 9. And we got rid of most of the animals, and just my dad focused on grain and zero till with my mom. And so that was the operation up until 5 or 6 years ago when they sold it.
Is it still in the family, or is it sold out?
No, unfortunately, it was sold outside the family. There was just nobody within the family that had the means and maybe even the skill set to do it. But I drive by it every time I go up to Clear Lake. And sometimes it's hard to drive by. I miss not having the farm to go home to, right? It's very much part of, if you grew up on a farm or even just maybe in a small town, like some of those moments are very in your blood, you know? So I miss it. And I miss that my kids won't be able to be part of it. But at the same time, we've got friends and family we can see back there still. So no, the farm is not with us anymore. It's in my heart, David, but not physically with us.
It's interesting. You've been all over the world, and you still have the, but we got flies in November. What's up with that?
I believe me, I've already killed 3 today. I thought it was too cold for flies.
I was hoping. Anyway, you've been all over the world with your job and stuff, and you still have the Manitoba accent. So that I think that's pretty cool.
I know. And I get it all the time with some of the words I use. People think I just say things really, particularly when I lived in Ontario, I got made fun of a lot. And I don't know if that's me or if that's a Manitoba thing, but I don't notice it here. So it must be a Manitoba thing, right?
I don't know how to describe it, but there is a bit of, I grew up in Ontario.
Right.
So, and when I moved here first, then people are like, "You're got a funny accent." I'm like, "I do?"
Yeah. Maybe and I never noticed anybody on Ontario, but one of my good friends from there, to this day, if I talk to her on the phone, she'll make fun of me for the way I say milk or milk and just a couple other words. She laughed every time. And it used to annoy her too, I'm sure.
Yeah. The accents and the way people talk is interesting. And with my job, I've seen so many of them.
Yeah.
You know, all over North America, that every area has its
dialect, right?
Uniqueness.
And you must notice it too. What I think is crazy is that it's an imaginary line when you cross the border or when you cross any border. And it doesn't happen every time I say go to Saskatchewan or cross to Kenora or something, or not even necessarily to Grand Forks. But there are times you'll only drive 2 hours from wherever you are. And you think, how on earth do we all sound so different here when I've barely gone any distance at all? I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. And I think we're losing a bit of that. Like, I think in years past, there was maybe more of that, because people didn't get out much. Mm-hmm. Nearby here, I was talking to an old farmer one time, and he lived about 4 miles from Steinbach. Mm-hmm. And when he was a little kid, he's passed on now, but when he was a little kid, that was a big deal to go 4 miles to Steinbach. So everybody in their area, you get kind of used to speaking your way and
Yeah.
your different expressions, and I mean, you go to Steinbach and people are like, "Oh, you're from the country." Like, well,
Right.
this
But
is the
we're
country.
so global now, right? Like if you think about it, David, you grew up in Ontario, you're in Manitoba. I've been in a lot of places, spent many years in Ontario, and a lot of people now have not just called like one place home. So their
Yeah.
voice is a mixture of all the different places they live. I've got a brother in the UK right now, and he's been there 6 or 7 months, and every once in a while, like he said something, and I think, well, there, like it sounds just a touch British, right? So he'll come home with different expressions and tone, and
Yeah.
it's
Did you
cool.
open the bonnet?
Yes, or he'll
It's like,
think about my flat, and I'm like, it's not your flat, it's an apartment. Or call me on my mobile, and I'm like, I'll call you on your cell phone. Like enough,
yeah. So since we're talking about living in different places, did you imagine when you're growing up in Minnedosa as a little girl that you would be all over the world?
No, but I think I've talked about this on air before, that when I was in grade 5, so I'd be 10, my parents my dad and mom were asked to go to Zimbabwe to help with some agriculture programs over there, and with a
Wow.
collection of cooperatives. My dad was going to help talk to them about zero till and different sustainable methods for farming. And so when I was in grade 5, we all moved to Africa for 6 months to Zimbabwe. And I think at that time I'd maybe been to BC before. On the way to Zimbabwe, we went to Ottawa, but I beyond Minot, North Dakota, like I hadn't been out of the country, and suddenly we were in Zimbabwe, and it was not a high-paying job, so we lived in like 1 or 2 bedroom apartments with all 6 of us, and we really had to work hard to get it. My mom homeschooled us for 6 months, and half the day she'd do lessons in the morning, but then the other half of the day was taking us out into the community to learn and grow and watch. And so we spent nights in huts and cooking meals with different locals and just learning a ton of things. And I kind of wonder, and I think we've all said this in my family, I don't know if we hadn't done that, would I have had the desire then to be like, oh, cool, like the world is a pretty incredible place. Let's get out there and see it. So I don't know if right after that, I suddenly was this person who wanted to be a journalist. I don't think so. But I definitely, after that, wanted to see other things. And then the journalism desire came a bit later. But yeah, it was pretty eye-opening to go from a small town of largely people who look the same, sound the same, speak the same language, and find yourself in a whole other country with different faces, culture, religion, all the rest. It was awesome. Like a bit terrifying at first, but awesome.
It's a fantastic experience. Could you imagine right now, your children are young, could you imagine packing up and going somewhere for 6 months right now with your whole family?
I would love to do that. I still I don't know how I would do that. And, you try to think about how would you afford to do that, and who would pay you, and what would the logistics be? And, when I think about security situations in different countries, what country would you pick where they could have this incredible experience and learn and see so much, but where you'd still be able to provide them, with some semblance of feeling safe? I would love to do it. How to do it is the other question. And then, of course, they might ask me, hang on, does that country have hockey? That might come up. So I don't know.
Yeah. If you went to Africa, probably not.
Yeah,
Or,
there might
yeah,
be.
there
When I
might be
lived in
some,
Israel, when I lived in Israel, they had one rink, I think, in the whole country. There might have been 2, but there was one big one in the northern part. And there were people who were like Canadians who lived in Israel who would drive 4 hours one way and back. So 8-hour round trip once a week just to play some hockey. But I don't know in a lot of those warmer countries if that exists everywhere. And I'm not doing an 8-hour round trip for a practice. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. The 5 minute across town is enough right now.
Exactly.
So how did you get the journalism bug? How did you get bit?
My parents were really big growing up we always had the radio on, always on the news. We had this, that was back when you watched the news at 6:00, or when we drove to school in the morning and we'd be out in like the truck or whatever, the radio was always on, music too, but a lot of news. My parents were big on McLean subscriptions, and the Globe and Mail would come in and out of the house, and it was about being informed. And I don't know, somewhere along the way, my sister met Knowlton Nash at an event. He was a former broadcaster, and that got us all talking about the possibility. And I have to honestly say, I can't recall if there was a moment that I said, I'm going to do this, except for I have to give all the credit to my sister. When I was applying to universities, I applied locally, but I'd also been applying to colleges and universities in Ontario. And back then the system was, you have to apply to 3 schools, like under the package, right? Pick 3 schools. And so I picked Guelph for agriculture, the University of Ottawa for speech pathology. And I can't remember what my third one was, but my sister came into the room and said, what are you doing? Like, I thought you wanted to try journalism. And she erased one of the schools and put me in for Carleton University journalism program. And I'd like to think I would have had that aha moment, what are you doing, at some point, but I don't know. If it hadn't been for her just saying, like, what's your deal? You're missing what you've been talking about. And so that was that. And away we go.
She must be an older sister if she just erased something on you.
She's a year older than me, and we're great best friends. But she has to say, and I listen to her. So. And that's all I'm going to say there.
Yeah. Were you good at writing? Did you do a lot of public speaking in high school, things like that?
I think I like to write. I wouldn't say I was great at it, but I really like to write. I love to read. Like, I'm a huge reader, a lot of it fiction, but some of it nonfiction. And our whole family was really into 4-H. So we did some of the programs early on that were more like, sewing or photography or those kinds of things. But I was in the beef club through high school. And so we had to do public speaking through that. That's just part of the mandate. And so I liked doing that, even though I will say, then and now, speaking in front of a crowd is still supremely terrifying every time I do it. Once you're into it, you're good. But those first few seconds still of getting up in front of anybody, you can see my hands shake, like, to this day. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it easier to speak into a camera?
Yes.
For you?
Well, because the camera doesn't, I can look into a camera, and when I did TV, you're trying to connect with people, but I couldn't see the reaction on the other side. Like, I don't know if they're rolling their eyes at me or wondering why I pronounced something that way, or if I got something wrong, were they, shaking their fist, giving me the finger, laughing at me, like questioning you don't know that. Whereas when you're on that stage, right, you can see people like, what is she saying? This isn't making sense. So it's just that public speaking, I think, no matter how many times you do it. I don't know about you, David, because I know you do some events too, but is it still a nerve-wracking thing, or you kind of got used to it?
I'm a little more used to it. I know the first time, I've been up in front of crowds, but the first time I was really paid to come and do something was for the Trucking HR Canada.
Right.
It was their mental health initiative. And I was so nervous. And then when I don't know, a little bit into my speech, all of a sudden I just wasn't anymore. And the lady that hired me, she said she could notice. Angela Splinter is her name. She still leads Trucking HR Canada, fantastic lady, and been a big help to me with different things. And she said she could see when that happened for me. And I like I'm pretty comfortable in front of a camera, or on the radio, but I like being in person better for the stuff I do normally, because I need to feel that reaction. I need to feel what people are feeling, and because my message is about mental health, and some of that stuff is pretty important
and personal, right? Like it's personal to you. So you want to make sure they're hearing with you. And for that too, like to connect with even just, if you can tell you're connecting with just even two people or one person, then you know
Yeah.
that it's working, right?
And it's interesting, like I talk a little bit about Greg and the first time that he and I talked on air and the reaction in person. And sometimes these things come out of left field, like at that mental health seminar for Trucking HR Canada, there's a lady there that if I had taken the 100 or so people that were there and decided who was going to react the most, she would probably been last on the list.
Hmm.
Shows you how good a reader I am. But she waited around afterwards and came up and talked to me, and we've still stay in contact.
Awesome.
And she's been doing some stuff with mental health. Is Stephanie Caruth for Minds for Matter out of Ontario, and it was very interesting. But there was such a. I was talking about rugby, and where my first head injury came from was rugby, and she was a rugby player, and she had the same experience. So, yeah, it's interesting how that stuff goes. So you went to Carleton for journalism. What were the next steps like for you?
So I did. That was a 4-year program, and we grew up in a family where there wasn't money for everyone to go to school, so it was hard work. It was a hard program, but I also had to work part-time, 2 or 3 jobs some years to get through. And as soon as I was done, another classmate of mine, I can remember sitting on our living room floor. We put out, in that spring, I bet you I sent out 100 resumes to different stations and newspapers and all the rest. I really wanted to do TV, but you're young, so you'll take anything. And I did not get one phone call, like of all those resumes that went out. Wow. And yeah, and it was like really supremely eye-opening. And then this show popped up that was like this pilot project between Rogers and CTV, and it was a little show called Career Cafe, where they wanted you to talk about different careers and highlight different industries. And it would be a weekly show, a daily show on Rogers, so kind of like a Shaw Cable, and then a weekly show on CTV. And I got the hosting gig with that, and it was great. But that show never got picked up. So then in the fall, I'm trying to remember now, I think there was a job offer somewhere in Western Canada, but I'd also signed up to do a program with CEDA, the Canadian International Development Agency, and I went to Zimbabwe and did some writing there. So I went back to where I had first done my first international trip, really, with my family, 15 years before that, or 10, 12 years before that. And I did 6 months there. And then when I got back, I came right back to Winnipeg and applied at a couple places. And then for some reason, I think having just done some different experiences, I actually got a couple of job offers on the same day for 2 different networks. And the one job was with Global Sports, and the other job was actually a news job. And I chose the sports one for some reason, because I just liked watching CKND growing up, and Global meant something to me. And so then I had a sports job, which I was, like I've said this often, I was not awesome at it, but I learned a lot at it and learned a lot about writing and the industry. And then that was that. Like next thing you know, I was into news, and a couple of years later with Global National, and a couple of years after that in Toronto, and getting to go all over the place. But it did not, I like to tell that to people, because I wanted very much to be a journalist, but it's not like I got out of school and people were clamoring to hire me, right? I just had to move and try, and then try again. And, here we are, right?
You have to keep pushing, and I don't know how many careers are easy to get into. I don't really know, but I know with trucking, when I was starting trucking, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of you take what you can until you have something you want to do.
Right. Yeah.
And I frankly, I couldn't imagine being a journalism student right now.
No.
Because everybody has their own podcast and thinks they know something. I am poking a little fun at myself, but
That's okay. It's a
um,
different landscape though, David. I mean, the same way all industries are now. I mean, what you do probably today in trucking versus what you did 20 years ago would be really different, even if you just looked at technology or if you looked at people's attitudes. And I think for sure, for what I do for a living, the scrutiny on us is higher than ever before. Maybe the hatred is higher than ever before. I know, like I didn't have people direct messaging me or texting me when I was 22, right? Because you couldn't. And so
yeah,
we had emails come into the station, but you still wouldn't even have got those at home until you went into work the next day and checked your email because you didn't have email at home. And now there's just
yeah.
this connection, which can be so great. Because if I think about like meeting you and how I watch what you do on social media and you can interact back and forth with so many great people, but you can also get really land-based. And so it's a totally different landscape.
It seems, yeah, everybody. Um, it's interesting these days. Like there's so much there's a fair amount of hatred, and that's one of the reasons
Mm-hmm.
I speak out all the time is because I want to try and counteract that a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that when people can get really nasty on social media, I don't get a ton of it, but I get some,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm willing to debate up to a certain point with people, but some of the comments being directed at people is just unbelievable. So how, and I know you must get some of that. There's that everywhere. How do you deal with that?
I'm pretty, it kind of just depends on what the comment is. Like one thing I don't know if people know that like our organization, we're Corus Entertainment, but we're Global News is the news component of what we do. And our reporters at CJOB and when I worked with Global, like we have really long list of measures that we have in place in front of us before we go to air with anything, right? We wouldn't just we have standards that we work really hard to uphold. And so for the most part, when it's things that I know that they're mad about, but we did our due diligence on, I don't get upset. I just like to make sure that they understand that this is how we fact check, this is where the source is from, here's who all the people we talk to. And if people want to get so mad at the end of that, well, then they probably decided coming into the conversation that they weren't going to like what's being said, and I can't fix that. But it's more as long as I can make sure people are aware of how hard. We had a story this week, of that Halloween candy that was laced with THC in Winnipeg. And we saw that on social media the night before. We didn't go to air with it the night before, right? We contact the police, we contact the people who post it, and we double check that the poster has also gone to police. We see how many reports are out there. We speak to our managers to make sure, are we good to go with this information? Are we sure that it's not just some random social media post? Like we're not just seeing things and reading them. We have a really long list of, so hours, probably 12, 13 hours after that post was read, we then started talking about it on air. That timeline might not be exact, but it's hours, sometimes days that we'll
Yeah,
hold on to information. So when I know that the story is right and that person's just going to be upset no matter what, I try really hard just to walk away. When it's personal, when it's something like just you're an idiot or you're a mouthpiece or you're fat or your hair's up, whatever, that kind of stuff feels mean. But you can also say, okay, this is just a really angry person. The stuff I really struggle with is the assumption. Like I've been called a communist, a liberal, a left winger, a right winger, a conservative. Like I support the government, I don't support the government, and it's like, well, which is it? I cannot be all of these things. And so I think at the end of that, you just try to think, well, if I had 10 listeners today that thought I represented 10 different ways of thinking, then I might be doing okay because you appeal to all of them. So it really only once or twice in 20 years can I honestly say it's bugged me about what someone's perceived me to be. And that got really tense, in the pandemic. And then probably 15 years ago, there was somebody who really went at me for my wardrobe once and accused me of being a bad role model for women and girls. And that was another moment where I thought, oh my gosh, you don't know me at all. But so
yeah,
if I can twice in 20 some years say, maybe it's less than 5 times anyway, David, I feel okay about it. But it's not easy, right? Because you have to sometimes not engage because you're not going to change that person's mind. So what are you fighting about?
Yeah. Yeah, because there's you can tell that some people are just out for a fight, and no matter what it is, they could be arguing that white is black and black is white.
Right.
Some people are just like that, and those you need to dismiss.
You
So
do. And on the other hand, we have several listeners who are really loyal, who might be frustrated fairly regularly with what's being said, but they constantly are communicating. And I also really appreciate that because, there's news and then there's opinion, and there's no way how I feel about something should ever be considered right, even 50% of the time, right? Like you should come back at me if you disagree. And I don't mind that as long as it's a
yeah,
healthy discourse. And in fact, there's been times someone will text in and I'll think, that is a great point. I never thought of that. And 5 minutes later, I'm back on air talking about it a different way. This listener they didn't change my mind, but they've got me thinking right now. And as long as everybody can look at it like that, like if we all just did it in a conversation like that, I would be much more enlightened for sure.
I think we do less listening these days and listen to rebut rather than just listening to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I like. I love having conversation with people. Some people have said to me, I went to do a trucking Zoom meeting during the pandemic, or did a little seminar with them, one piece of a seminar, and the pre what you call it, when they were checking me out,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, Dave, we noticed that you have a lot of farmers on your Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, is that a is that a problem? Well, you're a truck driver.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, all right, that's fine,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, some of them don't hold the values that we hold. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
It was haven't done any work for them since,
Mm.
because they were um, I might cut this part out, but they they looked at me. I don't have education past grade 12. I have some 13 and some other courses, but um, a lot of people in the mental health arena want somebody with initials behind their name,
Mm.
or you don't really know what you're talking about. And so I was given like 15 minutes out of 2 hours, and other people were talking a lot because they had initials behind their name, and they were so freaked out about that. I have a good internet connection, and I know what I'm doing to hook up, and they had pre-meetings, and they had all this stuff going on, and I sent all my stuff pre-recorded to them because they weren't confident that I could have this, that I could do this.
Mm.
I'm just a dumb truck driver talking about mental health, right? And I pre-recorded everything, sent it all over to them, and none of it worked for them.
Mm.
And literally 30 seconds before they went on, I didn't even have to be at the meeting, but I was there, and because I had said, like, I'm going to be here the whole time, and I want to hear what your other people have to say. And so I'm online, and I had made sure I was in good cell area. I'd gone to my dad's place. I was in Toronto at the time, and I busted my butt to try and get over there in time. Left my truck on the street out front of his condo and stuff like that. Get in there, and all of a sudden they're calling me, Dave, can you do your stuff live?
Mm.
I'm like, why? We can't get it running. They were going to play my Bell Let's Talk testimonial,
Okay.
and then I had my own speech that pre-recorded, pre-video, everything for them. And so I was totally unprepared, but I was like, okay, I can do that. And I went off without a hitch on my end. And it just blows my mind sometimes, and I've never done any work for them again. And the thing is that, it was a free event. I was just, they were charging people lots of money to watch this Zoom thing,
Right.
and they didn't want to pay me anything. I'm sure they paid some other speakers.
Hmm.
But they didn't want to pay me, and it's interesting. But that was kind of a tangent.
No, that's okay. I think that you made a good point about the fact that we don't listen well. And we often, I think, and I've been guilty of this, you've already decided before you hear something the way you feel about it. And so like, you're not genuinely walking into every experience with an open mind. And you can't do that with everything. I understand that. Like, you're going to already think a certain way about lots of topics in life. But I think people get halfway. I mean, I don't know the actual numbers for this, but people read a headline and they're done. They've read the headline, they didn't read anything in the story, and they're ranting away about the headline. Or they maybe got 9 seconds into the story and they decide they know the story, and then they're ranting about it. And you're like, no, they addressed that, like the next paragraph. So you only did the first 3 paragraphs. The 4th paragraph actually explained that. And then why didn't they interview any, so-and-sos in this story? Okay, well, if you'd gone a little further down, we did. And it's not to say that every story is perfect. It's just that I think our attention spans are really short. We don't listen. And I don't even know if we absorb, because of everything that's coming at you all the time in the world. I don't know how well we are even retaining information these days because of that TikTok video, whatever mentality, right? Where things are just going so fast. And then you move on to the next thing.
Yeah. No, you think that's getting clickbait, right? Everybody will jump on the headline or jump on something that's standing out and have not read any of that. I think that's getting more and more common.
Yeah, like I don't know if there would be, what the latest research shows. I know that we've had guests on, David, talking about the TikTok brain, and how your attention span has become shorter and that kids are suffering from that. And for sure, I think, because of the ability to consume news on a wide variety of platforms, and not just news, opinions and photos and what have you, it's really easy to say, even if you're on Twitter, like scroll through and feel like you're caught up. Okay, yeah, that happened in Ukraine. Okay, he was just elected in Israel. Okay, that just happened in South Africa. Oh, that's interesting down in the States. And you feel like you're like, okay, well, I don't sense what the world's talking about today, but not really. And I don't know if there's more people who've decided that makes them in the know, when really what they did was a very basic, scouring of headlines and then reacting to them. I feel like it must be getting worse, but it's just more on a certain day. And then we have other days where people are so very much engaged and they've really hung on to the whole conversation we might be having, or get to the end of a guest. When you get one of those couple of texts that say, oh my God, he was incredible when he said this, this, and this. And you think, wow, they stuck around for 17 minutes. That's tremendous. And so it's easy to point fingers and say people aren't listening, aren't engaged, because the opposite can happen too. It's a hard time for me. I'm a news junkie. I consume a ton. And I don't know sometimes if I'm doing the best I can to consume it properly, if that makes sense. Like, how you're supposed to have a meal and eat slowly and then digest afterwards, maybe even go for a walk. Like, it's almost like there should be that kind of rule around what you read online or in news, right? Do it slowly, double check, go back and read a different source. Okay, go for a walk before you have like some sort of explosive reaction. Take the dog out or something. And then, okay, now I'm ready to weigh in, right? I think we just are shoving our faces.
I think it's interesting, because you're on the start. And what do you have? 9-minute segments, or is it less than that?
So it kind of depends on the half hour, but sure, it'd be 7 to 9 minutes per segment. Yeah. And then if you do the other show, but if you go on to, I've done the 10 to 12 show, and you might have much, like you could do 12 minutes in a segment, or take a late commercial break. There's different conversations to be had, but it's hard to get a lot in. You've been interviewed.
Yeah. I don't know how long we were on the other day, but it just felt like a minute.
Oh, I bet
And
you
and
was
it,
5 or 6, David.
yeah, it probably
Yeah,
was, but that's how fast it goes. And um, I'm a little bit more used to it. Fortunately, I started off in the afternoon when you
right.
have more
More
time,
time.
right?
Yes, yes.
And when I came on the start the first time, then Greg says, "Dave, you got to remember this is the morning now, so this is really short segments, and so it's really important to keep your mind focused on what the topic is. Don't get off track. Get in, get out, and hopefully it comes across."
I think on the opposite end, even just now as I'm talking to you, and I think, my goodness, I didn't really answer that question, and it took me 3 minutes to get there. I'd be kicked off my own show if I was on the opposite end. Maybe Brett would be cueing the music for me, like, okay, wrap it up, McNabb.
Yeah, you guys have all been very nice to me if I start rambling on too long.
And there's never rambling. It's a really hard. There's very few people that we bring on that you ever want to interrupt, because you want to hear what they have to say, and especially when you're people who are coming from a place of like a lived experience, whether it's on the road, as we were talking to you about texting and driving, or mental health challenges. But every once in a while there'll be someone that comes on and you think, no, like, you're the politician, you should know the answer to this, and when you don't, then you gotta move on.
Thank you for listening this far. Please tune in next time to hear the rest of